All right, today my hope is to get through 2 more chapters. So let's see how it goes. Water from a bottle instead of a well. The day after the conversation with my daughter, I was working from home. The house was quiet since she had gone to work early herself. I was getting things lined up for the rest of the day when I reflected on how much the homeless man and my experience with him had helped comfort me with my daughter's new journey to relocate from Louisiana to Michigan. A little later, while I ran to the store to pick up some siding for a job, I was still thinking about it. As I was driving, I told God how grateful I was for his spirit in my life and for the not so random encounters with people he used to teach me and grow my faith. Mainly the homeless man who promised to have my back. I was nearing an intersection with a coffee shop on one corner. It was a spot where homeless people often gathered there with signs asking for help and handouts. It was one of their regular sites. But guess who was there on this day? None other than my homeless friend, the one who promised he'd have my back. Still carrying 2 bags and looking a little sunburned from the Louisiana sun, I think he would have stood out to me regardless of whether or not I knew him. Despite his obvious state of homelessness, he wasn't begging passerbys or holding a sign of any sort. He was just standing on the corner as if he were only waiting for the light to change so he could safely cross to the other side. I was beyond excitement about the prospect of talking to him again. I turned into the parking lot just past the coffee shop. I had to park behind the building. So I decided to go on in and get some bottled water as I rounded the corner. I hurriedly approached the counter, that is. I hurriedly approached the counter, thankful they weren't too busy. To my surprise, my daughter was standing behind the counter. It had not even registered with me that I was at the coffee shop where she worked, and I was too focused on meeting this man. My daughter noticed the excitement on my face and asked, "What's up? What's going on?" "I'm going to meet homeless Jesus," I replied and pointed out the window but she could only see the top of his head. One of the girls behind the counter asked, "What's he doing?" "I'll tell you later," my daughter replied. I wanted to grab a few bottles of water for him, I told my daughter. "Do you think he would want something to eat too?" she asked. I said I thought that it would be nice, and she grabbed the waters and a sandwich. I paid for the food and left quickly. I rushed through the parking lot to the edge of the hill that dropped down to where he had been standing. Gone. That's right, nowhere in sight. Where was he? How could he have disappeared so quickly? More than a little disappointed, I walked back to my truck without even going inside to tell my daughter what it rather hadn't happened. Oh well, I thought, you win some, you lose some. So I ate a snack I had in my truck, pulled out of the parking lot, and turned back onto the boulevard. As I slowed to turn, I looked down the road, and there he was again. He was walking toward the bridge. I couldn't get over to get to the outside lane, but I could get to the bridge, so I did. Finding a parking place in all heavy traffic wasn't easy, but I didn't care. I needed to do something for this guy. He'd already done more for me than he would ever know or could imagine. I had found or sort of created a parking place on a concrete pad so that there was no way I'd be able to miss him when he got there. I didn't have to wait long. He was a pretty fast walker. When I saw him, he was headed straight towards me. I couldn't believe it. I was going to get to talk to him again. Up to this point, I had told myself it was not crucial whether I met him or not. Who was I kidding, though? There were a few things in life I wanted more at this point than to meet this guy and talk to him. My truck was blocking the sidewalk. I told you I sort of created that spot. So he would have to pass right by me. This was it. I would be able to give him the sandwich, some water, and a bit of money I had in my pocket. But then he did a U-turn and started heading down the path that leads underneath the bridge. I hollered at him. I was not going to let this opportunity pass me by. He turned and stared at me, but the traffic noise was so loud he couldn't hear me telling him I had food and water. So I raised the bags over my head and kind of shook them. Not for long, though, because I felt like I was holding up a bag of treats for a dog, which in my opinion was demeaning. He figured it out and slowly put the 2 bags he was carrying on the grass, then ambled over to me. He wasn't the least bit enthused. It was almost like I was bothering him. But he came just to shut me up and get me off his case. But the closer he got, the more intently he looked at me. No darting eyes like back in January, just that intense look, like he could see right through me. I even started wondering if it was the same guy. Maybe a few months had clouded my memory. Either way, I told myself, if the guy needed something to eat and drink, I needed to give it to him. My doubts were put to rest a little later when he showed me that I needed what he had a lot more than he needed, a meager sandwich and a few bottles of water, what I could offer. Hey, how are you doing? I asked. I have some water and something for lunch if you want it. He replied, I don't need any water. I've got 30 bottles of Gatorade down there, pointing at the bridge. Some guy dropped it off the other day. That, a bunch of water bottles people give me. I asked him if he remembered me. He did not, and I began to explain what happened the 2 previous times I saw him. He seemed confused and a little uncomfortable. Did not push, but I caught myself looking over the features of his face. His lips were drawn in, his yellowed teeth and shriveled dry skin appeared to be signs of exposure and extended drug use. I started wondering what had happened to land him here, but that wasn't the point. So I shifted my focus back to what he said about the Gatorade. That's good, I replied. You've got what you need. Is that where you're living? I asked, pointing to where he had been headed. Yeah, I've got that Gatorade and all my other things. I fixed a place to sleep and keep my stuff hidden in another spot. That way, if anyone tries to rob me, they don't get the good stuff. Besides, whenever I need something, people provide. That floored me. People provide. Could he be that okay with his lot in life? Even with all the blessings that I've received in my life, I still struggle sometimes worrying about whether or not it's enough. And at that moment, I was ashamed. How could I be so egotistical and selfish? See, it's happening again. The Holy Spirit was using this man once again to reach me. Prejudice I wasn't even aware of having started being ripped from me. He went on talking. One of the stores had some misprinted shirts. Gave me a whole box of them. So I've got plenty of t-shirts, stopping only long enough to look down at the bag I had. He looked back in my eyes and asked, "What is this?" referring to the food. When I pulled up, I would have thought it didn't matter. He's homeless. He should be happy to have anything, right? Now it seemed as though he could take it or leave it. And I believe he easily could have. Again, the scales were falling from my eyes. I think it's a sausage and cheese croissant sandwich. My daughter made it for you at the coffee shop over there. The coffee shop, he questioned. You saw me at the coffee shop and followed me over here to give me this? Yes, sir, I replied. He gave me a look like, this guy needs a life. What's your name? I asked. Well, at birth, the name I was given was Larry, he replied. Confused by how he answered the question I asked, is it okay if I call you Larry? He nodded and I continued. Larry, I'm David and I've been hoping to meet you. He looked puzzled. Who wouldn't? Then looked back at the bag and said, sausage. I like sausage. So I'll take that off your hands if that's okay. I handed him the bag containing the sandwich, but he didn't look inside or even take it out. He just rolled it up and started telling me more about his life under the bridge. He spoke softly and I found myself moving closer to him so I could hear. He told me about how the police occasionally came through and cleared the area, but he knew that he could go back in a day or two and his stuff would still be in a secret spot. He told me about two young men that had recently become homeless by choice. They had been in a foster home and their parents died in a car crash. The youngest had become old enough to be on his own and they decided to leave their new home. They had been mistreated and other homeless people were preying on them. So Larry showed them the ropes, including how to get out of the homeless life. I guess Larry could tell I was curious to know a few more details, so he kept talking. One day, the younger boy showed up wearing some brand new socks. He was proud of the find that he'd made, Larry said. And then he pointed at the ground as if pointing at the boy's feet in a stern voice with a scowl upon his face and said, "I told that boy, take off those socks right now." The boy replied, "Those are my socks. I ain't taking them off." He thought I wanted his socks. I didn't. I just wanted him to understand something. Larry chuckled at the memory. So I did too, as I did on our first meeting, except this time I understood every word he said. Larry continued, "I told that boy to take off the socks because one day you're going to get a job interview and you wear them socks." My first thought upon hearing this was, why did Larry care? What was it to him whether the boy had clean socks for a job interview that may or may not happen? Was it anything to him? He, Larry, didn't have anything to gain by the boy wearing clean socks. But that was the point, wasn't it? He didn't have a single solitary thing to gain. He just did it because he cared. No ulterior motive, no payback expected. Could a homeless man, live by the golden rule and the second greatest commandment, to love one another? There I was doing it again, thinking about something other than what was right in front of me, instead of giving my undivided attention. Snap out of it, David, I told myself, as I once again gave my full attention to the details he was sharing about his life. He has quite an interesting life. He told me about a man who takes him to lunch from time to time. Next, he told me about a time he asked the man for $10. When the man handed him a 20, Larry walked up to the diner's cash register where they were having lunch and asked the waitress to give him 2 tens in exchange. When he handed the guy the other 10, he told Larry to keep it. "I said, no, sir," Larry said with a matter-of-fact look on his face. "Only need $10. So why would I keep it? I don't need it." The look on Larry's face was genuinely searching. I think he wanted me to unravel the mystery of why he would keep the extra $10 if he didn't need it. He made it clear that asking for money wasn't the norm for him. He collects cans and does odd jobs, and when his bags are full of cans, he turns them to the recycling center for cash. It dawned on me at that point that I was completely engrossed in Larry's story. The traffic was buzzing all around us. That no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was that I was there to hear God speak to me through a homeless man, a man who at birth was given the name Larry. Reflection. Have you ever set out to help or bless someone with your gifts, time, money, or service, only to end up being the one who was bigger blessed? More importantly, what did you do with that blessing? Did you take it for granted, like the 9 of the 10 lepers Jesus healed? Take a few minutes, read the account of what happened in Luke 17:11-19. Are you more like one of the 9? Or were you like the one who came back to thank Jesus? By coming back to say thank you, this leper, who was also Samaritan, returned the blessing to Jesus. He blessed Jesus by recognizing the gift he'd been given and by acknowledging Jesus and the one in which we should put our faith. Be open to the Spirit. Be entirely and continuously accessible to God and available to his leading and his teaching. And to be content with just knowing God is always there and will always provide what you need when you need it, and in the way you need it. In other words, he's got your back. Oh, and remember, the lessons aren't just for when you think you might need to have something to learn, but rather when God knows there is something you need to learn. For example, before I'd started talking to Larry, I put some money in my pocket, intending to give it to him. But after hearing him talk about giving back money he didn't need, I didn't even offer it to him. What would have been the point? Not too little, not too much, just enough stuff so that we have plenty of room for God. Put falsehood and lying far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Provide me only with the food I need, lest, being full, I deny you, saying, "Who is the Lord?" Or being in want, I steal and profane the name of my God. Proverbs 30:8-9. You know, there's going to be some other incredible stuff that happens later on in this book. But the connection on the side of the road that day was what now I look back to the most. It wasn't the most intense solitary moment, as you'll find out, but it was the most complete moment of feeling like I was standing in God's will and relating with another person that I really didn't know I could relate to. And seeing them love others and how it's not about our station in life. How it's not about what we do for a living. It's not about how much money we make. It doesn't matter what family we come from. It doesn't matter who our circle of friends are. None of that. None of that can stop us from loving one another. All right. Let's next chapter is called "A Reminder from a Stranger." And I think we can get this in on the same episode here. Nearly a year later, the Easter holiday was approaching, and my father-in-law decided he was no longer doing the traditional family crawfish boil. It was time, he said, for a new tradition. I wasn't about to argue with him because I decided that since we wouldn't be required to attend the traditional Easter festivities, which I dearly love, a holiday would be an excellent opportunity to visit our daughter in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My wife agreed wholeheartedly, so we drove from Lafayette to New Orleans to get a direct flight to Detroit. Once we got to the airport, I assumed that it would be no problem to sign on the dotted line and shell out a little money for the long-term parking, or maybe a lot of money. I thought wrong. As it turned out, all those frequent flyers, as well as the not so frequent but better informed than me flyers, had planned ahead and reserved their long-term spots in the parking garage. It's a small garage. There wasn't a lot of room, and you have to park away from the airport. Now I know. After circling the parking garage several times and praying for the full sign to be off the next time around, I decided to drop my family off at the departure counter, find a place to park while they checked the bags, and then meet up with them again. I was about to find out, however, that God had other, better plans. I pulled up to the place nearest our airline's check-in kiosk. I got out of the car long enough to help my wife unload the luggage onto the sidewalk, then drove off without actually knowing where I would go. In the back of my mind, I had decided to leave the airport and park in a lot nearby. I know, dumb idea, but at the time, I couldn't think of anything better to do. After unloading our bags, I noticed several transport vehicles nearby. That's a fancy way of describing the vans that take people to and from the hotels, motels, there to the airport. The driver of one of these vehicles was walking around the shuttle, stretching his legs while waiting for his next fare. I decided to approach him and ask, "Excuse me, do you know where I can park my vehicle until Monday?" He looked up at me and asked if I was staying at the hotel where he worked. I told him I was not. He paused and said, "You know what? Come with me. Follow me to the hotel. I'll arrange a place for you to park and bring you back." I didn't know this man from Adam, as the saying goes. He could have been scamming me, but I didn't let those thoughts do anything more than make a speedy, quick pass through my mind. Instead, I trusted he's got my back. and did what he asked. I followed him to the hotel. With every rotation of my tires, I could hear my wife, friends, and everyone else I knew telling me how crazy I was for doing that. But I refused to listen to those voices. I chose to believe God had my back. And I said out loud, I know you've got my back on this. And you know what? As soon as I said it out loud, affirming my convictions and putting them out there to hold on to every single bit of doubt and fear vanished. Completely gone. I had peace like a river running through my soul. When we got to the hotel, there was a space available right in the very front row. I parked, got out, locked the door, then I unlocked it and double checked to make sure I hadn't left anything. Seeing that I hadn't, I relocked the door and went inside. The man at the desk asked where I'd parked. I pointed out the door. Right there, I replied. Wow, I don't know how that happened. Those spots are never open this time of day. The man behind the desk and the man from the airport spent a couple of minutes discussing whether or not I should move my car to the back lot, then decided it would be fine where it was. I was relieved. There were lights above the car, a security camera pointed in that direction. It was a busy, high traffic area. It was doubtful anyone would try to break into it with it sitting in plain sight of everything. The shuttle driver said it was time to leave, so he walked out the door and I started to get in. I'll take care of your bag, sir. You just have a seat. Won't take but a minute, said the driver. I didn't have much, just my carry-on and a stuffed animal belonging to my youngest son. Nevertheless, he took the items and placed them on a shelf next to the seat where I was sitting. In all honesty, I thought it would have been quicker if I would have just done it myself. But who was I to argue or complain, right? He asked if I were comfortable and told me it would not take long to get back. He then went out the side door and checked to be sure it was secure. I'm positive he'd done this process at least 1,000 times before that day. Entering the driver's door and jumping into his seat, he flipped a couple of switches, turned the key, and we were moving. It seemed like it was all in one movement. After a second or two, he peered back over his shoulder and said, "Sir, my name is Rico, and it's a pleasure to meet you." I said, "Likewise, Rico. My name is David." I immediately knew that I liked this guy. So we talked about where my family and I were going and where we lived for the next few minutes. He was from Franklin, Louisiana, which wasn't too far from us as it turned out. I even have distant relatives living there. A piece of information I shared with it. Rico said that when he got off work, he was going back to Franklin for Easter. Several members of his family would be celebrating the holiday at his cousin's house. After that, Rico asked me about a bracelet I was wearing. The bracelet is made of those little metal fishing swivels. I said it's called a Fisher of Men bracelet. I got it at a men's retreat I attended. It reminds me that he has called us to be fishers of men, just like he and his disciples were. Rico nodded his approval and understanding, which made me think to myself, I knew I liked this guy for a reason. Then he went on to tell me that he is part of a group that tries to help young men struggling to better their lives and develop a relationship with Christ. A lot of the guys are homeless and have been until recently, he said. A lot of them are addicts trying to live clean and sober lives. The ride back seemed much quicker than the ride to the hotel. I know that was primarily due to Rico's ability to maneuver through the traffic, but the conversation helped too. It was only a matter of a few minutes, but in a short amount of time, I came to feel like Rico and I were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a while, but were close regardless of miles between us. We arrived at the airport, and this time I grabbed my items and started to get out. As I did, Rico turned in his driver's seat and said, "Hold on, I need to tell you something." "What's that, Rico?" I asked. I believe that when God brings people together as he did us, there's a good reason for doing so. Not just in passing, but like this, he said, pointing at the vehicle. "I just met you, but I feel like we've been friends, close friends for years. That's no coincidence. God planned it that way. I don't know why yet, but I'm sure of it," he said confidently. "Do you mean like man sharpens man as iron sharpens iron?" I asked. He smiled a sly smile, said, "Exactly like that." "Thank you, Rico. And just so you know, I agree, I said as I smiled back. We quickly exchanged phone numbers, agreed to get back in touch after the weekend. Then I hurried off to find my wife and kids. I spotted them on the side of the ticket counter with bags open. My wife explained that one bag was 5 pounds overweight and the other was 7 pounds underweight. The two boys were already fidgety, which was only adding to my wife's frustration. On the other hand, I was cool, calm, and collected, and still feeling good about the conversation I had had with Rico. My experience gave me just what I needed to calm the boys down and help my wife redistribute the weight in our bags so we could move on through this TSA line. Once that was done, we boarded the plane and arrived at our daughter's house without any further incidents or inconveniences. At that, and that, my friends, is no coincidence. Had I done the smart thing and continued to circle the parking garage until a space was available, if it did, I would have been at least as frustrated with the boys as my wife. The only difference would have been that I wouldn't have handled it with as much grace as she did. But God had my back and theirs. He planted the idea in my head to leave the airport, which in turn caused me to drive past the shuttles where Rico was the only guy close enough for me to speak to, and so on, so forth, until I was back at the airport with the peace of God blanketing me. That I could be the husband and father my wife and kids needed and deserved. See how that works? God had my back. Because I looked at it from that perspective, I was able to trust him to do all things for our good. Thank him for his wisdom and protection. Praise him for the blessings of family, a parking space, a new friend, a brother in Christ, and for the gift of being his. After a great visit with my daughter and her fiance, we flew back into New Orleans. I called the number for the shuttle, and sure enough, Rico was our driver again. Again, this was no coincidence. When he arrived to pick us up, I felt like I was introducing my family to Rico, a longtime friend I hadn't seen in years. The conversation was as easy and enjoyable the second time around as it was when we'd first met. When we got to the hotel, we said goodbye, loaded our luggage into the car, and headed for home. I have to tell you, I was a little sad to think that Rico's purpose in my life was complete. That God had put him in my life for the sole purpose of making connection with him and grounding me when my wife and sons needed me to be grounded. And let's not forget where I was going. I was going to visit my daughter, the same daughter who was still searching for truth. We'd already agreed that the events of this nature weren't coincidences, that they were orchestrated by the spirit of the universe. Or whoever it is, God knew an incident like this would be one more proof I could give her of his existence that she would listen to, respect, and ponder on. I know how vital these things are. So if I never see or talk to Rico again, I'll be content and full of joy, knowing God had my back in such an extraordinary way. Not only did he give me what I needed, but he also gave me a new friend, and a brother in Christ to go with it. Reflection. My stating of these things not being coincident may sound like I do not believe in free will. Nothing could be farther from the truth. These experiences have caused me to reconsider the way I view God's participation in our daily lives. So how do we rationally accept free will in God's presence? As said before, the Holy Spirit allows us in when we open ourselves to him. We can open ourselves by requesting his presence. We can also open ourselves by being so empty of selfishness that our very bodies and souls let him in. Let this be a reminder to make us more aware of the people we meet or have the potential to meet. I pray that my encounter with a stranger turned friend makes all of us more aware of our responsibility to share our faith in word and deed. I decided right then and there to be available to God 24/7, to be someone's Rico, so they would know God had their backs the way he had mine. And Larry. Was Larry a homeless version of Rico? Or was I Larry's Rico? Or were Larry and I each other's Rico? Whew. I'd like to think it's D, all of the above. As I drove home from the airport, I thought about all of these things. I didn't know if I would ever see Rico or Larry ever again, but I knew I would never forget them or the impact they'd had on my life. That was enough. So because they were more than just memories. They were spiritual manna given each day to remind me to live by the Spirit with everything I've got. You know, the little story about Rico, I'm not sure how good of a job I did of getting across the impact, but it's funny, but that's okay, because we all have those moments, that those things that happen, that we feel God's presence in a seemingly routine or average moment, and it's hard to explain. That doesn't make it not real. That doesn't mean he's not with us. You know, miracles don't only happen when we're in times of real despair and suffering. They do happen then. But God is walking with us always. He's walking with us when we're high on the mountain after we've come off of a retreat, or when we're down low in the valley when we can't even feel his presence. That doesn't change though. He's still with us. And I love seeing him in the daily interactions that I have with others. I heard a priest recently say, "Why should Mary be important to me?" And his answer was, "Because she's important to God." And I would ask you, why should anyone be important to me? Why should you be important to me? And the answer is, because you're important to God. So I don't know if anybody's watching this, but if you are, I hope you're getting something out of it. I hope you're getting to think a little bit, and I hope you're improving your relationship with God, because that's what it's all about. Thanks. See you on the next chapter.